I want to talk to you guys today about Hagar and Ishmael. Okay, we're talking about Abram, right? Who and his name got changed to Abraham, right? And last week I briefly mentioned the covenant with you. I didn't really go into a lot of details about the covenant because I've done that before. But I talked to you about Abram making a covenant, or actually God making a covenant with Abram. So that's kind of where we're going to pick up. Today my focus is Hagar and Ishmael. Genesis 16 through 21 deals with Hagar and Ishmael, okay? But it also has other stories in it. So I'm going to give you a brief timeline, and then we're going to go back to the other characters. Cutting the covenant. God cut the covenant with Abraham. Genesis 15. All right? Remember what happens next is Sarai gives Abram her slave, her servant, Hagar. Anybody have a problem with that? I got a problem with that. What do you think it means to be a slave or servant? What do you think a slave means? Go ahead, throw out ideas. What do you think it would mean to be a slave? What's your understanding of a slave?
You have no rights of your own.
No rights of your own.
You obey every order.
You obey every order. Anything else?
You expect it to work.
Can your master beat you? Oh.
They can do whatever they want.
Could your master kill you? Oh. So see, you guys all have a worldly view of slaves. So this is our understanding of slavery today, right? Okay. Quite frankly, and if you talk about women versus men, now it gets really ugly. Really ugly. Then let's go back in time. The ancient Near East. Okay? Ancient Near East. That's the Middle East. Okay? Turkey, Iran. So this would be Persia, Hittite, Amorite, Canaan. Okay? All right. So the ancient Near East. Slaves were treated not so well. Most of the things that you have said. But God. Okay. There's no law yet with Abraham, right? There's no law yet. But yet, from the beginning, don't you think God told them how to behave and how? Okay. So when we think of servants and we think of slaves, when we talk about like Daniel was taken, and Hananiah and Azariah, okay, they were taken into Babel, right? We call them Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel. They were taken into. They were actually taken as slaves. They were taken as servants, and yet they were rulers in that kingdom. How is that so? Because anything under the king was a servant. Anything under the king was a slave. Okay? You're under authority. But if you look at scripture, God's way, a slave could earn their own money. Oh, they did have rights. Oh, or privileges. They could earn their own money and buy their freedom. We don't have that concept as a slave. Right? So they did have time off. If a woman was taken as a slave, but then the man decided that he wanted her as a concubine, it's a lesser wife, she was still given the rights and privileges of a wife. Not like the world's way of, oh, you're mine, I can do whatever I want. Totally different, two different attitudes, okay? Two different attitudes. In this particular time period, slaves could also be, for example, we know Hagar is Egyptian, right? So she came out of Egypt. What happened in Egypt not too long ago with Abram and Sarai? Oh, she's my sister. And did Sarai go into Pharaoh's house? It's quite possible. I'm not saying this is true. It's quite possible that Hagar was an Egyptian princess. Because Abram is known now from the Pharaoh, he's my prophet. He'll pray for you and you'll be healed. So he's a great man. maybe she'll have a better life and more of a chance with him than she would in my kingdom. There's so many. Okay? Just like Daniel, Meshach, Azariah, Hananiah, they came from the temple. They came from learned, and they went to Babel, and they were learned. Okay? They could be men of rank and privilege and still be a slave or a servant. That's what I'm trying to get at. Okay? So our idea of slave and servant doesn't necessarily mean all negative. Like we have, like in our history, our American history, slavery in our American history is not good. Bad. Okay? It was not done well. Were there some that did it well? Sure. But not all. Okay? You shouldn't be kidnapped, number one. If you read scriptures, you read God's law, he's got provisions. You could also sell yourself as a servant. I'm losing everything. I need to work. I'm going to sell myself. How long do you think God allowed you to be a slave in Israel? 7 years. And after that, you went free. Did you go free with nothing? No. You went out with something. Okay? So it's when we see that word slave, let's not always think, you're going to beat you. I mean, and you couldn't kill a slave. Okay? They were human. And God recognizes human. And let's face it, we're all slaves right now. Just saying. So then so what happens is Sarah gives Hagar to Abram, right? Hagar becomes pregnant. And we know that she has an attitude. Because
She's a princess.
I'm pregnant. And you're old and has been and you're not. And so she develops this attitude. And then there's a problem between Abram and Sarah. And so Abram says, do with her what you want. She's your slave. She's your slave before she's my wife. Oh. So Pharaoh probably gave her to Sarah. Hagar, Abram tells Sarai, do what you want. And so she starts treating Hagar really harsh. Okay? Really harsh. She gets real mean with her. And so Hagar runs away. And the angel of the Lord finds her by a stream. That's probably bigger than a stream. Well, I don't know. The angel of the Lord finds her by a stream. And he goes, you're pregnant. Here's the thing I want you to understand, though. It's verse 16:9 says, return and submit. Now, first of all, is she of the line of Abram?
Is she of the line
Of Abram? No.
Oh, no.
She's a Egyptian.
Yeah.
Oh. So she's not from Abram's home. And yet the angel of the Lord sees her. And he says, I want you to return and submit. This one. So this is pre-Moses. Right? This is pre-Moses. Okay? So return and submit. The angel of the Lord can speak to anyone. That's what I want you to understand. Anyone. Okay? All right. Where was she? She was wandering in the wilderness. And she's not an Israelite. Well, of course, none of them are right now. Okay? To wander in the wilderness is to go astray, to make an error. She did it her own way. She ran away. She went out into the wilderness. She went astray. But then God talks to her, and what does he do? Her name, by the way, do you know what her name means? Hagar means to flee.
She lived up to it.
She did. It also can mean to be dragged off or put out away, which happens later. Okay? So you've got the play on both of her names. So in Genesis 16, chapter 11, I'm going to go to that. Verse 11, I'm going to tell you this one really quick. It says, The angel of the Lord of Adonai said to her, look, you are pregnant and you will give birth to a son and you are to call his name Ishmael. Do you know what Ishmael means? Don't read what's in your Bible because that's not the route I'm going to. Okay, so don't go to that one.
Rebellion?
No. Ooh, good thought, but no, not rebellion. God hears. God hears.
Yeah.
Ishmael means God hears. Okay? So, hold on to that. God, you could also say if God hears, he pays attention. Right? Okay. All right. So then, Ishmael, God will hear, God pays attention. And God tells her in verse 12, the angel says, he will be a wild donkey of a man with his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, living at life at odds with all his kinsmen. But I'm going to tell you, Ishmael will be grafted in. Okay? Parts Ishmael will come back. Okay? He's under the covenant. Well, he's not yet because it hasn't been cut yet. So I'm getting ahead of myself. All right. So she named Adonai who had spoken to her. Wait a minute. What? What?
She named you.
A pagan woman? A pagan woman gives God a name. One of my favorites. El Roy, the God who sees me. The God who sees me. The God who sees me where I am. She gives God a name. The God who sees me where I am. It doesn't matter how much she in rebellion ran away. She went wandering out into the wilderness. She made an error, right? Remember wilderness, right? To go astray. And God still has his eyes on her. He still knows where she's at, so much so that he goes and finds her and talks to her. There's nowhere you can go, nothing you can do that you can get away with him or away from him, okay? So hold on to that, whether you're Jewish or not.
You can run, but you can't hide.
You can remind, but nobody's Jewish at this point.
Yeah.
So isn't that wonderful? Okay. All right. So then in 17:1, God sees Abraham. So she goes back. She has a child. And then 13 years later, Abram is told he has an appearance from God. And God says, I am El Shaddai. I am, right? I am El Shaddai. All right. Walk in my presence. That's what he tells him. Walk in my presence. So that's when Abram's name is changed to Abraham. Sarah's name is changed to Sarah. Ishmael's 13. All of the men get circumcised. Is Ishmael the product of covenant? Is the covenant promises his? No. The covenant promises belong to Isaac. Okay? But Ishmael is under the covenant. If we're grafted in, we're also under the covenant. Okay? So there's some really deep principles here for you to understand, even if you're not Jewish. Okay? And so then after that, after the circumcision, then Abraham has an encounter with 3 men. And that's not the story I want to go to either, but I want you to know that this is where it happens. Okay? 3 men come to the oaks. They talk to him and tell him that Sarah will have a child this time next year. That's important. This time next year. So Ishmael's 13. Sarah's going to have a child this time next year. That'll make him at least 14, right? Okay. And something else happens, and we'll jump back into that story later. So Isaac is born, and then he's weaned, and it's when he's weaned. Oh, how long does it take for a child to be weaned, in biblically speaking?
Years.
Yeah, years. So he could be at least 3. So now we're looking at Ishmael being about 17. Oh my goodness. Okay, so he's not a little boy, right? Okay, he's not a little boy. And guess what happens? Hagar is sent away. Now that's hard. Because it says in the Bible, it says that Ishmael, Abraham threw a big party for the baby, because it's like, a big 3-year-old party, but it's a big weaning party. He's going to be a man-child now, not a baby, not a toddler anymore, okay? And so they throw this big party. And Sarah looks out, And depending on what version you read and depending on how far you look, it could either say that Ishmael was mocking him or making fun of him, or it can say that Ishmael was playing with him. All three of those are correct. We don't know. But Sarah saw it and went, oh no, you're not going to, that my son is the inheritor. So legally, in the time period, in order for Isaac to be firstborn, Abram must expel the slave girl. And by doing so, the male child goes as well. And so his firstborn heir has basically been cut off, disinherited.
I wonder if, because Hagar looked on Sarah with contempt.
Yes,
And that is something that is in her
yes,
character
yes,
and would have come through to her child.
yes.
And
Could
he
have.
Yeah, and he could
Could have.
been doing that same thing.
That's the impression we get.
But is
So-
Abraham a godly man?
Yes.
So how could he discard his child and Hagar without some conscience behind it?
Well, it bothered him. We know that. It says it bothered him. He begged God, could not the promised child be Ishmael? And he says
Oh,
no.
he wanted to give it to Ishmael?
Yes. Read from 16 to 21. Okay? You guys read the story so you make sure I'm telling you correct. Okay? From Genesis 16 to 21. So yes, Abram loved Ishmael. He didn't just haphazardly send him off his way and then didn't feel anything. I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe that for a second. Okay? So could he have been mocking? Sure. You know, I would hope that Ishmael had some of his father and his mother. He's circumcised at 13. So he comes under the covenant. Abram's his father. You don't think he doesn't talk about God? Yeah. And his mother hears God. Even identifies him, gives him a name. So, yeah. He's aware of God. Okay? Until Islam came in 700s. Okay? Until Islam arrived on the scene in 700 AD. Most Arabs, pre-Muslims, believed in a single God. And the God of Abraham. Okay? So, yeah. And many of them are coming back to that now. Okay, back to truth. So let me continue. So what happens is then Abram sends her off, right? Abram sends her off. So they're typically right down in this area, right here, okay? So he's a little older than this, right? Yeah. He's probably as tall or taller than his mama, because, you know, right? He's not a little boy.
How wrong have all these Bible stories gotten when you think about it?
Well, it says boy, so they don't look
Yeah.
any further. But when you start, well, it says he was 13. That's not 13.
No, it's not.
Okay, but by the time Isaac is born, he's 14. By the time he's weaned, he's probably closer to 17. So check everything. Check everything. Check everything. Read it for yourself, okay? All right. And then what happens? So there's significance that he has to be expelled, because that means that the right of the firstborn is not yours. Your inheritance has been cut off. Okay? So Isaac is the inheritor to the covenant. That doesn't mean Ishmael can't be grafted into the covenant, because he is. Okay? All right. So he sends him out to the wilderness. Here's the Dead Sea. Galilee's way up here. There's some green here. There should be green going up that way. But look at this. This is Egypt. This is the Sinai, which is part of Egypt. This over here is Egypt. So if they're down in here, this area, the Hebron area, the Negev, it says he moved down into the Negev, which is right in through here. This is the wilderness. She went out into this wilderness. It's like a wilderness. That's what I think of wilderness when I think wilderness, right? Destitute, sandy, no water, no vegetation, right? No man's land. Okay. And they wandered in the desert. Chapter 21 real fast. Abram got up early in the morning, took bread and a skin of water, gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and the child. Then he sent her away. See, because from Abram's perspective, Ishmael is his child. Okay? And then he sent her away. And after leaving, she wandered in the desert around Beersheba. And when the water in the skin was gone, she left the child under a bush and went and sat down, looking the other way about a bowshot's distance, because she said, I cannot bear to watch my child die. So she sat there looking away, crying and weeping. But Ishmael, now if you're reading along, you know that that's not the words there. What does Ishmael mean? What's the two first words that I'm looking at? The next two words. God what?
God hears.
Hears. God hears. So that's what I'm saying right here. Where am I?
Yep, down here, 17.
Thank you. Ishmael, the boy's voice. Do you see it? God heard the boy's voice, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, and he said to her, what's wrong with you, Hagar? Don't be afraid, because God has heard the voice of the boy in his present situation. Children. Before Ishmael was born, you'll call his name, God hears. Because see, at this moment in time, and even before this moment in time, God already saw him out here. For us, how many years later? For us, that's a long time. For God, he saw it all at the same time. So no matter where you're going to be, next year, 10 years, 15 years, 2 months, 10 minutes, God already knows. He already hears you in that current situation. He hears you today. He hears you tomorrow. He'll hear you in 20 years if we're still, well, we will be. Even in the millennium, he'll hear us. Okay? So Hagar's the one crying out to God. But God tells and comes and talks to her and says, I heard the boy. Ishmael. Okay? There's significance for everything. So don't think God doesn't see you. In the worst circumstance, no water, no food, no hope, no inheritance, no riches, but God. All right? Okay. I love the story of Hagar. I love the story of Hagar. And I love the story of Ishmael at this point, because God sees you in your current position. He sees you where you are. He sees you where you're going to be. He sees where you were. It's all according to your perspective. But see, according to God's perspective, you've already lived and died. Or maybe you haven't died at all because you might be alive in the millennium. Does that not blow your mind? He already knows. He already sees. There's nowhere you can go. There's no wilderness wandering that you can go and not be known by God. He will see Hagar, Roy, and Ishmael. He will hear. Okay?
Don't be afraid, because he's got a plan.
And don't be afraid. That's right. Don't shirk back. Don't be afraid. Don't give up. All right? So let me finish this point. God heard the boy's voice, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven. He said to her, what's wrong with you, Hagar? Don't be afraid, because God has heard the voice of the boy in his present situation. Get up, lift the boy up, hold him tightly in your hand, because I'm going to make him a great nation. Does God lie? No. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went, filled the skin with water, and gave the boy water to drink. Okay? Don't give up, and he will provide. He already had a plan. It was already there. She just didn't see it. Okay? All right.